Hello and welcome back. Today we have a guest that I got introduced by Nate, and he's something of a figure that I'm looking up to just now because he's running a facility. He's always busy, and it's really nice to get in contact with these types of coaches. So, hello, how you doing?
Doing well. How you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
So, if you could just give us a little introduction of yourself and how it is that you came about S&C and your progression through the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is SACHIN McDONNELL. Been doing this almost, let's see, I started probably almost 20 years ago. I've been at Maximum Sports Conditioning going on 12 years. I kind of got in the industry because I tore my ACL. So I was playing basketball, my knee hyperextended. This is right after high school ended. And my original goal was to get into psychology, actually. And it actually helped out because it helps a lot in strength conditioning. But after I tore my ACL, had surgery, realized everything I was doing was wrong, and then just started to delve into it. Really studied a lot, got my exercise science degree at Seattle Pacific University, and then ended up at Maximum Sports Conditioning as an intern at first, and then was brought on as an owner relatively recently, and just been training mostly athletes the last decade and just always learning. I mean, I've been, like I said, been doing it almost 20 years, and I'm still learning stuff even this year that I didn't know previously. So I love the industry because there's always new stuff, and it keeps it exciting, essentially.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting to see how many coaches come in to this industry through injuries,
Yeah.
through like these little niggles that we have, and then we get introduced to this whole new world of training.
Hmm.
So how was that
Absolutely.
process going from like tearing your ACL to then coming into S&C?
Yeah. So, like I said, I tore my ACL. Realized everything I'd been doing was the wrong stuff. I was just focusing on what I thought was correct. And remember, this is like the early 2000s at that time. So information wasn't as good as it is now. Um, and at first, honestly, I wanted to go into physical therapy just because I was like, okay, people are getting hurt. I need to make sure they get better and I want to learn more about it. And while I was doing physical therapy, one of the other clients that was doing PT at the same time as me essentially was just walking up and down like a few stairs for like 30 minutes. And I was like, this is not exciting at all. I need to watch people run. I need to watch them jump, watch them throw. And so that's when that shift kind of happened. So instead of pursuing the DPT, the doctorate in physical therapy, decided to just go the exercise science route. And I haven't looked back since. Just
Yeah,
been again, just been learning everything, and it's been a great ride so far.
I mean, from your Instagram, it looks it. Obviously, you've just mentioned that you now are a co-owner of Maximum Strength Conditioning. How
Yep.
does that sort of go from tearing your ACL, becoming an S&C coach, to now running the facility?
Yeah, it's definitely different mindsets. I mean, at first it was learn everything I can, and then I held that mindset. And then it was as soon as I started learning, it was be the most knowledgeable and best version I can be. And I still have that. And now that it's more on the business side, you learn essentially a lot of the back end stuff that needs to happen
Mm,
and the psychology of a client because it's not, I'll be honest, when I first started, I thought it was all about making the best program and then people will come. And that's I can't tell you how wrong that is. And it's crazy because you we still do that. We make the best program we can and a lot of people come train with us, but that's not what gets them in. What gets them in is again learning the psychology of what they want. There's this thing they want, there's this other thing we know they need, and then you have to bridge that gap so they understand that you're the person who's going to get them to their goals. Because what you
100%.
know is good for them isn't necessarily what they want. And then you have to, again, that's the coaching part of it. That's the psychology part of it. You have to be able to bridge that gap to get them to buy in to what you know is right for them.
Yeah, that's something that I'm really big on as well. Is like I've mentioned this a lot of times in this podcast, but the Conscious Coaching book by Bartholomew,
Absolutely.
like that was one of that was the first book that I ever read on S&C,
Yeah.
and that. to me, just like it sort of led the way for the whole how I coach, how I program. Because like it's exactly what you're saying. If you can build the best program in the world, but if that psychology, that leadership isn't there, that program's not going to
Yeah,
land.
and it's true. It's funny because we've dealt with a lot of people who are really, really smart, and they just don't end up making good coaches because they have what we call the 49%. They have the exercise science degree, they have the knowledge, they know what to do biomechanically, physiologically, all of that. But they're just not good communicators. They can't get the athletes on their side. They're just more like, this is what you need to do, and listen to me because I know what I'm doing. It's like no one wants to be told what to do. You're
Mm.
not their parent. So understanding that they know that you care for them and they know that you're doing this for them. That's the big thing. That's the key. Being able to like persuasion is one of the biggest things you need to learn as a coach. So it's good that you read that book. That's a great book. I'm actually trying to get Brett Bartholomew out for a seminar. I've been talking with
Oh,
his
wow.
people, so we're trying to see if we can set something up.
He's a funny story. So when how old was I? I was 2000. It was I think it was 2016. I had read his book a couple of years prior to that. In 2016, I was like a little crossroad between continuing with just public gyms and PT that route, like
Hmm.
personal trainer, and then or S&C. And but if I was to go S&C, I would have to go back to university, do whatever else. So I like on the off chance, I just shot him a DM on Instagram,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Hey, coach, I've read your book. Love what it says. This is where I'm currently at. What's your thoughts?" And he, within a couple of days, he replied, and I was like, "Oh." So he actually said, "Look, you kind of need to do what you think is best for you. University obviously gets you that top tier, like elite level type athletes, and it sort of gives you a better understanding of the body and how to properly like implement training to get the adaptations that you need. So from there, you can just sort of pick." But to me, it was like he took time out of his day to reply to someone that he'd never met,
Yeah.
never spoke to, but he took that time to give me a little bit of advice on what to do, and it's landed me here now. And I've coached with Ron McKeefery and all that stuff. So for me,
Mhm.
and Nate's a big one too. Like
Yeah.
that boy is science heavy, but I
Oh
love
yeah,
it.
Nate's the man.
No, so that would be an amazing workshop as well.
Yeah.
Is that something that you do a lot?
Recently, ever since I have adult money now, and I'm actually making decent money. I'm investing into stuff like that because I mean, one of the big things that's happened since I started in industry is like obviously we had the internet back then, but it wasn't quite what it was before. Like when I started, there was no social media, or if it was, it's very much in its infancy. And now you can reach out to other coaches, and a lot of coaches in this industry are very giving of their time. Like obviously, there's people like they're busy, so I've definitely offered to pay money to coaches for their time because that's I value their time, I value
Hmm.
their information. But at the same time, I've gotten a lot of free information too. And it's especially if you're starting out, just kind of reach out like you did. And a lot of coaches will be very much like, yeah, this is what we do. Like we had our PMEV seminar um in April of this year where we had Rolf Ullman, Tony Villani, and John Evans. And I was asking them stuff before PMEV was ever even a thought, and they
Mm.
would hop on a call with me, tell me, how they're doing stuff. And it's been a lot of, like I said at the beginning, I'm learning a lot more even now 20 years in. And it's cool to see that this is a very like giving industry because it's a lot of information to delve through, and trying to just
Hmm.
essentially create your own system of all the stuff you learn is always going to be a journey that you're on as a S&C coach.
100%. And I think as well as like the fact that sort of like yourself, you've came on, we've never met before, but when Nate was on, he sort of told me about you and your program and how everything was run, and I added you the same day. You accepted, and that same night I shot a DM, and again you replied, and you're now here. So, if for anyone who's wanting to reach out to you, how would you recommend that process happening?
Yeah, easiest way is through Instagram. I mean, I can't, I get a lot of DMs, so and I try to get through all of them, but that's probably the easiest way. DM me on at Coach SACHIN McDONNELL. That's the easiest way to do it. You can also um, contact the gym, maxsc_gym. Those are probably the easiest ways to do it. And then if you just happen, like if they contact you and then you kind of create a thread where you introduce us real quick, I'm more than happy to hop on that as well.
Nice. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um, when Nate was on, he had mentioned that you're a conjugate guy.
hmm
Can you sort of explain what conjugate method is and how it is that you apply it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of different versions of conjugate out there, which makes it tough. I kind of look at it as surfing the kind of speed and strength, essentially wave. So you're working on strength speed, or you can call that like slow strength. You're working on speed strength, you're working on explosive strength. And then you're also building up a lot of different things. So I view it very similarly to kind of Charlie Francis stuff in which you're never really leaving anything. Like you don't really have a block of strength and a block of speed. Now, can you bias that in a block? Yeah, you can, because a lot of different versions of periodization can fit under this umbrella of conjugate. Because I've run a linear model within the conjugate model too. So that's kind of what it is to me. So you're just building up a bunch of different stuff to make sure that nothing gets left behind. Now, you can't build it all equally, although you might try to, and you can get away with it at first. But once you're hitting some elite stuff, you do kind of have to block it, if you want to call it that. But you still have everything in the system. That way, nothing gets left behind.
Yeah. So how does the linear sort of fit into the conjugate?
Yeah, good question. So if you look at, and I got this line from Dave Tate, and he said, everything in the long term is linear. It's just, to me, how do you want to get there, right? You're just essentially going up and trying to get better. So what we'll do is a conjugate model essentially looks at, if you listen to Louis' stuff, you need to rotate exercises. You don't want to um, there's this thing called the law of accommodation, and you don't want to accommodate to an exercise. So you'll switch stuff up. So essentially what we've been doing recently is we'll switch bars every week. And so if you
Hmm.
look at it, we're essentially, we have our straight bar, we have our safety squat bar, and you're just trying to get both of those up as high as you can. But because we're switching off, that is kind of conjugate ish, because it is the law of accommodation. But at the same time, we still say, especially it's mostly middle school and high school kids, just go up 5 pounds every time we revisit this lift. So the beginners, they're just on straight bar. They just go straight linear. Then once they're a little more advanced, they'll switch bars every week. And then the
Hmm.
even more advanced people will like add bands or chains, usually chains for us. And then we'll kind of rotate the dynamic effort day two. But again, um, you're doing linear stuff at the end of the day. You're trying to progress. Like you need to
Hmm.
progressively overload no matter what. So that's how
Yeah.
you can have a linear type program within a conjugate model.
Yeah. That's something that interesting that you've said is use bands and chains.
hmm
That's something I've been adding recently on
Yeah.
since I've been able to get that adult money. I can
hmm
buy my own
Yep.
my own equipment.
Yep.
Can you just explain how the bands and chains would work when you're lifting weights?
Yeah. So it's accommodating resistance, right? So Dr. Fred Hatfield talked about years ago compensatory acceleration training, where once you're past your sticking point, you can essentially cruise through the lift and you're not getting like maximal muscle tension. So he advised push as hard as you can through the whole range of motion.
Mm,
Accommodating resistance essentially makes it so you're forced to do that, because as you go down with bands or chains, it gets lighter, and then as you stand up and your leverages increase, it gets heavier or more load or more band or more chain. So that way you're kind of forced to have to push hard through the whole thing. Like as much as I would love to say everyone pushes as hard as they can through the whole set, sometimes it just doesn't happen, and that stuff kind of forces you to do it.
yeah. Um, can you sort of explain because I've obviously crept on your Instagram,
Mhm.
the Miwo and the Dio.
Yeah, so that's just how I'm labeling certain days. So certain people call it max effort, dynamic effort. I just say max effort workout and dynamic effort workout. So max effort workout, if you're not familiar with conjugate, is where you're hitting a 1 to 3 rep max. And some people would argue like a 5 rep max, but you're essentially trying to break a record. And then so we like to do it with our advanced kids, 1 rep max stuff for their first lift. Then dynamic effort work is essentially transforming a little bit the more you talk with people. So it used to be you'd go classic Louis Simmons, you're trying to hit zero point 0.8 meters per second on Nintendo, which is still a good way to do it. But now the way I view dynamic effort work is you're just trying to go for a speed record. So like what
Mm,
can I do at that speed? Like the heavier I can go at that speed, the better. So one of the guys who I really like who's doing this really well, and it's actually dynamic effort, but also brief maximal tension is Jared Bidney. So essentially what Jared Bidney does is he has his people on the squat go down to a 12-inch box with a 4-inch pad, which is soft, so they need more leg drive. And then they're trying to hit zero point 0.6 meters per second. And that's essentially what your record is. There's
mm,
another guy, Zach Goodman, who's doing a lot of good stuff with it. Um, he has it a little bit heavier, but he's making some of the strongest kids in the nation. So kind of that you're not going to a true 1 RM is really important in that system. We personally still like it because we do brief maximal tension afterwards.
mm,
And then the dynamic effort work again, you're just trying to hit speeds. So we kind of do it as a complex. Just because we like that you're hitting something kind of heavy and then pretty fast. So very much in the same vein as a coach at a I don't think he's at LSU anymore, but he was for a long time, Boo Schexnayder. So he'll talk about complexes, and he does it the same way I like to do it. In which you're not hitting like something heavy, you're hitting something like kind of fast, but then you're going on to something like a jump. And that for me personally has worked better, and our system has worked better, and we've been getting pretty good results.
yeah. So obviously in the S&C world, you've got people who are sort of philosophy based.
Hmm.
They stick to one philosophy, and that's how they train their
Hmm.
athletes.
Yeah.
It kind of sounds like you've sort of took a philosophy and sort of adapted some of its principles into your own sort of way of doing things. How does
Yeah.
that sort of process come about?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it is education and experience. I mean, so
Mm,
if any of your listeners are like older, like I am, like I'm 37, turning 38 in March. If you're in the SSC world back in the early 2000s, you were on tnation.com. You're listening to a lot of people on there. I personally started with a program in the early, I think it's 2002. I bought it online. It was called Super Strength Super Fast by Christopher McCrane. And that kind of introduced me. I didn't know it at the time, but he's doing block periodization. For 2 weeks, it was essentially dynamic effort work or brief maximal tension, depending on how you want to view it. And then you do 4 weeks of max effort and then back to 2 weeks. And then I kind of went from there to Kelly Baggett, to Eric Cressy, to Louis Simmons and Charlie Francis. And it was just there's just a lot of people. I remember we were doing presentations at work because I wanted the coaches to kind of understand all the coaches that
mm,
have influenced me, and it ended up being like I think we stopped at 30 coaches because it's like okay, there's just gonna be too many to name.
um,
So yeah, it was a lot of people, and it's a lot. I'll be honest, it's a lot of trial and error, and there's some really good coaches who have stuff that does amazing things that just doesn't fit in our system.
mm,
So if you ever listen to our PMAV seminar, which we have for sale online, you'll listen to Rolf Ullman talk about this stuff for Olympic level sprinters. And then you'll listen to Tony Villani, who's like, I like some of the stuff Rolf is doing. He's one of the best to ever do it. It just doesn't fit in our system because we don't do track speed. We do 40 speed and game speed. So just finding what works for you is going to be really important, and that's for anyone because like my system might not work with what you have, but it's the whole Bruce Lee thing, right? It's absorb what's useful and throw away what's useless. You just kind of figure it out along the way too, and like ask mentors, see what they think. Like just yesterday, So we don't do a lot of Olympic lifting. We don't do any
Mm,
Olympic lifting in our program. And I was texting Bill Gillespie, and I was like, "Hey, I know I've heard how you do it." And then just being able to text him and see what he thought about it was, it confirmed some things and was kind of eye opening in other ways. And just reach out like you've already done. Just reach out to as many people as you can, because people are very giving of their time. This industry is very much like, let's create like the best athletes we can.
mm. And I think as well, we're obviously very, as far as I know, most of the SC coaches that I've spoken to, they're very giving of their time, like
Hmm.
you've just said. Um, and for me, I'm all the way across the UK. I've not met all that many coaches here, but in America, it seems like a lot of S&C coaches are very tight knit, very like, let's bring up the whole industry so the industry can grow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, like, I don't want coaches, especially young coaches, to think, I don't want them to be entitled to think that, like,
Mm,
oh, I should be getting stuff for free. I'm in this industry, so you should be giving me the time. Like, no, don't think like that. It just happens to be our community is like that for especially younger kids. But one of the big things I tell my coaches is, if you really like a coach, invest in what they made. Like, show them you support them with your dollar. Like, that's a great way to do it. Everyone needs to make a living, and make sure that they know that they're heard with their products and stuff. Like, that's a great way to
mm-hmm,
support the community, because it does allow for us to grow, and do more research and be able to find out what works, and then have science essentially prove that what we do works.
exactly.
Um, but yeah, no, there's a lot of people who give a lot of free time, but do not be afraid
Yeah,
to
don't
spend money
expect it.
on, yeah,
Yeah.
don't expect it, but and like, you should want to give them your money, essentially, is a
Mm-hmm,
great mindset to have. Because I can't tell you how many coaches who have spoken to me, and then later on I'll Venmo them money, even though they would have did it for free. I'm like, no, I want to show you I value your time, I value your energy, I value your experience. So be very much willing to do that when you have the ability to do that. Don't just do it
mm-hmm,
up front when you don't have the adult money yet. But just even like something like, hey, about your product, I was wondering if I can ask you a few things about it. That leads to a lot of really in-depth discussion, and that's essentially when I started, how I got a lot of discussions going with a lot of different coaches. Like, I spent $50 on their ebook. I was like, hey, can I speak to you about it? I had a couple questions. That turned into a 2-hour conversation with them. So
um,
all that stuff is really good to do.
yeah. I think as well as like sometimes you won't be perfectly suited for someone,
Hmm.
but even just recommending them to someone else, like an S&C coach that you've personally researched, or like I've done that a lot. Like if someone that has reached out to me and's like this is what I want to do, if I'm not knowledgeable enough to help them with it, I'm like I'll try and be as nice as possible. Like I've not really had experience with this, but here's this guy that I know that could also probably help you more than I can at this present moment. I
Right.
think reaching out and doing it that way, like, hey, I've sent someone your way. Let me know if they reach out. I think that's also a good way to sort of get these conversations going with coaches and experiencing different ways. And then it's also open up to you asking them questions. Hey, how do you coach? How do you train? How do you program essentially?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, what you'll find is all the really good coaches, they enjoy talking about programming. It's like all the really good SNC coaches are very nerdy about this stuff. And so it's not like they're gonna be like, oh, I gotta talk about this again. They're like, okay, let's go. This is what I found, this is what I didn't find, blah, 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 blah. So it's always a good conversation.
100%. Something that Nate actually brought up, and it's something that I've watched on his Instagram and yours, is the shred mill, and I was sort of fascinated by it. Can you
Yeah.
explain how that sort of works
Yeah,
and how that came about?
absolutely. So that's been our big speed maker, essentially. That thing is a monster. So that was invented by Tony Villani, who's speaker at the PMAV. He's down in Florida, and essentially it works on magnetic resistance. so you can set it up in certain ways to hit certain parts of the 40-yard dash. And that machine is why he created like 8 of the 10 fastest times ever. So essentially what happens is you have this essentially magnet on the side that will interact with the spinning wheel. And the more
Mm.
magnets that interact with it, the harder it is. So essentially kind of acts like a sled, but like a better version of a sled too, because it kind of keeps the resistance constant versus a sled. Once you get it going, it's essentially, yeah, has momentum, has some sway to it. So that treadmill has increased, or I should say decreased, our especially 10-yard times a ton. So we do a lot of what he calls gear 2, which
Mm.
is your 0 to 10. It's really your first like 4 steps. And so it's made some of the most explosive first steps we've had. Like if you look at a lot of the stuff that lists like the speed guys in the area, we'll have a lot of them. It's not to say there aren't people outside of us that don't. There's a lot of fast people out there, but that shred mill just turns people into explosive monsters.
What's the fastest time you've seen on that?
Yeah, so we have people, so the elite level people, like the NFL people, are so there are 10 different resistances, and then we usually do gear 2, and we've had people go like resistance. Oops, sorry, I'm getting a call. Do you still see me on
Oh,
my end?
yeah.
All right, so essentially, we've had people get up to like 12, 13 miles an hour on gear 5 and 6.
Damn.
So they're going pretty fast. Yeah, it's pretty good. No one has hit that 14 at 8 yet, but it does translate into some kids who are hitting like 1.5-ish seconds for that first 10, which if you look at
Damn.
the chart for a 40-yard dash, that's like elite. Like essentially for a 40-yard dash, if you want to run a 4.25, you got to hit 1.5 in the first 10, 1.0 in the second 10, and then like a 0.9, then a 0.85 or something, or it's something like that. Where, but that first 20, like we're matching like anyone in the nation.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's some fast people.
Yeah, we try. Our speed. Again, I tell Nate and our other coaches, our coach, Coach Edwin, Coach Laura, Coach Kali, Coach Brian. We have intern Cole, who's really good. I tell them all, I'll put our speed, at least in that first 20, up against anyone in the world. Anything past that, because our facility is only 25 yards, I can't really speak
You're
to. But
pissed.
that first 20, oh, I'll put anyone. I'll put world-class athletes against our best people.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's good. It's good to have confidence in your program as well. I
Yeah,
think that
exactly. And it's taking time. That didn't come up front. It I will say our program has gotten better every year, and it's because of the coaches that we have that are willing to learn and willing to put in time outside of work to listen to podcasts and stuff like that, that we get essentially a bunch of people, a bunch of great minds talking about it, and it just gets better every year.
yeah, I think this is one of the reasons why I started this podcast is so that younger coaches and newer coaches coming in have sort of a base on where to start and where it can end up. And
Yeah.
I think for me, being out in the UK, it's a little bit harder because there's not that many jobs coming in.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, how can I get people to sort of figure out where they are and how to progress that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Um, you've previously spoke about speed and during the lifts. Can you sort of explain what equipment you use and why that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we use a barbell. Another piece of equipment is use a box for box squats. We personally like that better for essentially starting strength, if you want to call it that, or like static overcome by dynamic. And then as far as VBT stuff, we have a few things that we like. Like one of the people who rents has God, which one was it? Like the Vitruve or whatever that one is called.
Mm,
I have the Flex Stronger one that we use sometimes. But what will happen, and the younger coaches will definitely experience this, is you'll just start to see like your coaching. I agree with Charlie Francis 100%. Your coaching eye is your best tool. And then stuff like the VBT stuff just kind of confirms what you already know.
mm,
The biggest thing with that though is you have to be knowledgeable, because anyone can say, yeah, that looks fast enough. And if you don't really have a concept of what like zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.9 meters per second looks like, you might be like, yeah, it's fast enough. It's nowhere near close. So
Mm.
investing in any type of VBT stuff like that is definitely important. Um we're talking to someone, I don't know how much I can say, but we're talking to someone about their piece of equipment that we are planning to get in the gym. They're just developing right now. But there's a lot of other good ones too. Like I would say get the Flex Stronger if you can get it. Get there's one that you can get on Simply Faster that's really good. If you can get that, get it. Any of those are all really good. This new one we're waiting for by this certain someone who I can't necessarily name right now is gonna take VBT to another level. And I'm excited to see
Nice.
everything he's putting it in there.
I might ask after the podcast.
Yeah, so I got you. I got you. Tell me after. I'll tell you after, I should say.
I've previously worked with Perch at UW, and in my university we worked with GymAware. They
Hmm.
were really nice too. I
Yeah.
think I've spoke recently to Rep One or
Hmm.
One Rep, I
Yeah,
think it
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Their system's quite good because it kind of counteracts for the sway of the bar as well,
Hmm.
which is I found quite interesting that a company sort of invested time into like the bar path of it as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so for a little bit, my powerlifting coach was Travis Mash, and his whole thing that he's doing with all the VBT stuff, and even with excuse me, all the stuff he's doing with like flywheel and stuff like that, all his stuff is amazing. So if you need a lot of information on all that stuff, I say he's the man to go to. Him and Dr. Brian Mann, who's doing all his research, and there's a lot of other really good ones too. Um, but yeah, all just to all the young coaches, just read it all.
Mm,
Read it all because
100%.
it's gonna just give you like you can just listen to me and you'll have like almost everything you need, but you won't have perspective on how I got there. So understanding how we started with stuff and then what people are doing now who are not people you're just listening to is key to continue to grow in this
100%.
industry. Yeah.
It's also challenging your beliefs as well. Because
Yeah.
like I'll sometimes do this where for the longest time I would program deadlift for every athlete.
Hmm.
Like that was one of the staple exercises I used to use.
Yeah.
But until it was who was it? It was some strongman, and they were like, "Yeah, I do deadlift because I know how to. But if I'm programming for New Year sort of gym goers, trap bar deadlift, say for the risk to reward ratio on a trap bar is a lot more than a deadlift. And
Yeah.
I at first were like, "Ah, nah,
Yeah.
disagree." But
Uh,
then I did my own research and I was
yeah.
like, right, if I'm going to be a good coach, I need to look at it. I need to play devil advocate here.
Yep.
And now I don't program
Yeah. Don't put them
deadlifts
in.
for newcomers. I'll work on it.
Yeah.
I think that's an important lift to work on, but I'll do it smartly as opposed to just throwing them in because there is a lot of cues. Like
Yeah.
people don't think of the cues that go into it, like taking the slack off the bar being one of the biggest one. People just lift and think that's a slack off.
Mhm.
But it's not. It's just like that little chink is the slack off. And then you brace in, lats in, back tight, and like all these processes. But if you're coaching that to someone straight off the bat, they're like, so much, can't focus. What's
Yeah,
going on?
exactly. Exactly. And that again, like you said, like just hearing people who you disagree with, like I think I heard that from Peter Obrist. I think it's on the Rogan podcast or something.
That was it.
That was the one. Yeah, that one got pretty popular. And I see where he's coming from. And again, it's like you said, it's you got to play devil's advocate against yourself, and that's how you keep getting better. And you know, like you said with deadlift, like there can be a lot of cues that you have to learn. And I one thing again talking about learning, like during the PMAV seminar, Rolf Ullman was like, when you're coaching, you got to remember two's company, three's a crowd. And I was like, I've never heard that before. And he's like, yeah, if you're telling them more than two things to be doing, you're telling them too much. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I probably need to talk a little less sometimes then. I'm like, get your shin angle, throw your hands forward, stab back, and, keep your posture, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, I'll just focus on two things now and then just get those two things right. instead
Yeah,
of just trying to get them perfect on that one, all in one day.
100%. And I think it's a really hard thing, especially because now you're having to question the way you coach.
Yep,
And for
exactly.
me, it was like for me the biggest thing is I never want to feel like I know everything. If I know
Hmm.
everything, I'm starting to decline my coaching.
Yeah.
And that to me is really important. Like I'm always questioning why I do something. And that's something I got actually from Coach Mark is like always play advocate against yourself.
Hmm.
What are
Exactly.
some of the sort of ways that you've sort of challenged that in yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a lot. It's been a lot over the years. I mean, I would definitely say coming out of college, like I had an ego. I was like, man, I know everything. I've studied everything, blah 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 blah. And I tell this story a lot. And so I got in charge of these two. I was put in charge of these two athletes program for a month. It was kind of classic stuff. They kind of went heavier the first day. They went a little bit lighter the second day. And then a month later, we tested their 1RM. They got weaker. And I'm like, okay, I need to figure some stuff out. So one of the reasons I trended more towards conjugate stuff, even more so when I got to really working in the industry, is because I found out if you're not trying to break a record, it's really tough to get stronger. So it's a good way to keep people kind of in line. So just kind of following percentages is something that I was like, oh, maybe these aren't the end all be all. Because if you look at kind of classic Russian stuff, it's all like 70 to 85%, and then a little, heavier when you need to peak or something. And it worked for them. I'm not gonna say it's a bad program at all. Obviously, worked for decades. But that's one thing where I had to learn, and I had to be like, oh, maybe you need this max effort stuff. I would say that there are certain ways that sprints look that
Mm,
is good. And then if you kind of listen to people now, you're like, there's a lot of people who look really good during I'm getting a call again, sorry. There's a
that's all.
lot of people who look really good doing like the mock drills and look really good when they sprint, and they're not as fast as other people. Classic example now is Usain Bolt. Like
Mm,
there's like some weird stuff that he does, but it obviously worked. So and it's not to say you shouldn't teach like these basics of it, but again, going back to Dave Tate, I really like what he says. There's like technique, there's form, and there's style, and you have to understand what you're seeing. Like if they have good technique, you want everyone to have good technique,
mm,
but it doesn't mean that their form's all going to look the same. Then everyone just kind of has like these idiosyncrasies, and you have to understand that that might not necessarily be something you need to fix just because it falls under this like model, right? So I'm a little older. I mentioned I'm almost 40 now. I don't know where the time went. When I was younger, I was watching Michael Johnson. And a
mm,
lower level coach would think when you have his head way far back like that, that's going to hold him back. He had a smart enough coach to be like, you know, no, I don't need to do that. It's not taking away from his speed. Um, so just kind of understanding that you have to have like some type of philosophy, and you have to have that to grow, but you have to be willing to like change what you understand as well. Kind of the one of the things that I kind of say to my coaches, because they'll all understand this reference, is the movie Kung Fu Panda, where Sifu was teaching the other animals a certain way, found out Poe learned this different way, and then it's like, oh, he became like the greatest fighter. And it's like you have to be able to be like that. Like an athlete doesn't have to fit into our system. As
mm,
easy as that makes it for us as coaches, it's not always going to be like that. So those are probably the big things I had to change over time. I would say that now that I'm delving more into fascia, that's probably another
mm,
thing I have been less focused on as a coach, where I'm like, oh, I can make kids really powerful, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be the best version of them, because there's this whole system that we just didn't address. And it's like, okay, now we've put more fascial based stuff in, and it's showing in our numbers. So man, I feel like this has been a long answer, but I can
No,
keep about stuff that that I've had to change over the years. So the cool thing about us is we have like we stick with old school sheets, and then we've had kids who have graduated, and just looking at the progression of like how workouts have changed has been like, dang, I forgot we used to do that, and now we would never do that. So it's pretty cool to see like how we've grown over the years.
this is something that I've sort of recently gotten into as well. I did a sports massage course, just again progressing that learning
Yeah.
basis for me. Um, you spoke about fascia. That's something that was really important in this sports massage course that I did. Can you sort of talk about fascia and how you can load it?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on who you listen to. So I really like Bill Parisi's stuff is good, and he'll talk about he has certain pieces of information where he'll talk about how long you should be doing stuff and certain ways you have to move in order to build up your fascia. My actual go-to person is my buddy Dan Foley. So I've been on more than a few calls with him, and he has a program called Fascia Chronicles that is like it just blew my mind. I'm like, I never really delved into this because I've even spoken with, some physical therapists, and I'm like, what do you think fascia does? And they're like, well, it's just kind of there. Like they're not saying it's not important, but understanding the role of how it affects movement has been really eye-opening for me because I was speaking with coach Randy Huntington, and a lot of his stuff is kind of like elastic based. Him and Rolf Ullman are like best friends. They have this essentially the same type of philosophy. And then there's I forgot what Instagram post it was, but it essentially said you don't need to worry about fascia, and it was someone I really respected. But I was like, I essentially sent it to them. I was like, "What do you think about this?" And they're like, "This is totally off base. Like, you have to know the
Mm,
non-volitional stuff that happens, because one thing Coach Huntington will say is muscles are there to reposition joints in order to take advantage of essentially elastic components, and just essentially how like I tend to think of stuff in a muscular paradigm and hypertrophying the parts of the fascia that need to get thicker in order for movement like that to happen better is like I'm finding really important, and it kind of leads
mhm,
back to you need to do certain things that aren't necessarily like power based. Like you need to do like extensive tempo stuff. Like Nate and I we were talking, and he was his most athletic when he was like jumping rope. And it's because you get like, kind of those low amplitude
mhm. It's
reps.
that quick snap.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be this big knee bend into jump. And it can be. It's not to say it's wrong. Um because if you listen to the other coach who was at PMAV, John Evans, he's the coach of Isaiah Rivera. Isaiah Rivera has the highest running jump in the world. And then you'll
Mhm,
see there's a big not disconnect, but there's a different way to think about how you want to jump off 2 feet versus how you want to jump off 1 foot versus how you want to
mhm,
jump. And it's very much a different style. Just to give your listeners a little insight, when he would do all the elastic stuff with Isaiah, it wouldn't end up as well as when he did other stuff. So learning what actually works for what you're trying to do is hugely important because you can know, I can't tell you how much I've seen this, but you can know all the science, and you can BS your way into a certain way of training because you can
mhm.
explain it scientifically, but then when it gets applied, it's all wrong. So it's important that that's why I'm always like reach out to coaches, because coaches invariably great coaches will be 30 to 50 years ahead of science. So don't just like have your science base. You need that stuff. You absolutely need it. But there are coaches who are so far ahead of science that it will like you can't wait 30 years for science to prove that you're right. Right.
Yes,
So it's key kind of stay on the cutting edge of stuff. And I'll be honest, it ends up being you kind of waste your money on some stuff because some stuff is like, okay, this didn't really work like I thought it would. But that's kind of the risk you take to try to be a top flight person. So it just kind of comes with the game.
100%. And I think as well, some of these coaches are 30 years ahead. Most of why they're that ahead is because research itself has to be very controlled.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be every single factor in research and science essentially has to be controlled in order to get these results.
Yep.
And I think some coaches are that ahead because they think outside the box instead.
Exactly.
They're like,
Exactly.
okay, this because some of the stuff that we do isn't controllable.
Yeah.
Like you not one rep is exactly the same.
Yep.
How can you control that?
Yep.
You can't.
You can't. Exactly. Exactly. And it's like the thing with coaches is they're dealing with stuff outside of what happens in the weight room or on the track or stuff like that too. Like I'll say for us, our program has evolved to be very low volume because kids have a lot of practices and they have a lot of
Mm,
individuals and they have a lot of games. You have to account for stuff like that. You can't just make a program to be like, if you just do this program the way I want, you'll be great. It's like, no, they're not gonna. They have other stuff to do. They have 4 hours of homework after this. They have
mm-hmm.
AP tests. They have a lot of stuff. So being able to one keep them healthy and then keep make them powerful is huge. Like we've very recently started teaching the kids the best ability is availability. So
Mm,
if kids are they could be the most powerful versions of themselves, but if they're too hurt to play, it's not really helping anything. So always take those stresses into account because they will bite you in the butt if you don't, because you don't want to be known as a strength coach who gets people hurt.
yep. You'll quickly not be a strength and conditioning coach.
Exactly. You better find another industry.
Something that you touched on before as well is like, and I've recently started this as well, is like working with the stabilizing muscles
Hmm.
and how important that is to then strengthen up the bigger muscles.
Hmm.
And again, onto that point of the fascia, I think that's something that ties into it as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, you've got to be able to, like, you can't just use the big stuff, right? Because the big muscles are always going to be powerful, but you can't find power if you're not stable, right?
Mm,
It's like imagine trying to do squat on the Bosu ball. That's kind of the classic example. You're not going to hit a 1 RM. So you need that stability to keep that health and keep your brain. It's really your brain, right? It's really, does your brain feel safe doing it?
mm,
And if your brain feels safe doing it, you're gonna be able to do a lot of stuff that you didn't know you'd be able to do.
100%. I've recently went back and wrote Weight Room Wisdom by Ron McKeefery.
Yeah,
And one of the examples that it said is your brain, if you tell your brain it can't do something, it won't do anything.
yeah, exactly.
So I think keeping your training safe and measurable for that athlete
Hmm.
is the way that you're going to progress that athlete. Because if he thinks, oh, this is heavy, I won't can get up, he's not going to get up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the coaching part. It's the art of coaching it, right? You got to be able to push people just a little bit and persuade them that they can do it. And whether they get it or not, it's like you know what to do either way. If they get it, you tell them good job. If they don't get it, it's like it's okay. It was just this and this. You'll get it next time. And being like I said, you like one of my biggest lessons I learned probably about 5 years into being at Max SC was it's more important to change someone's mood than someone's
Mm,
mind. Because a lot of people, like, you could have all the knowledge in the world, but if they hate your guts or they're like, oh, you're just doing this so you can punish me, they can, especially in the private sector like I'm in, they'll just leave. They can just leave. So you got to be able to get, like I said, get people on your side, get them liking being with you, and then be someone of high integrity who is putting into work to make sure they're getting the results that they deserve, really.
100%. How do you navigate sort of, you've just touched on it, you're in a private facility, these kids don't have to be there. How do you navigate that buy-in and that sort of aspect of them coming through your program?
Yeah, so you got to have a good personality. Like for me, this was hard for me because, like I said, I had an ego coming out of college, very by nature, very introverted, very monotone when I was a kid, and kind of learning how to be a coach was very big for me. It's like when I first started, I probably talked like this and told them, okay, go lower, you can jump higher, you're good. And that didn't make them want to do anything, right? It's not putting any energy into it. You got to be able to bring energy to your athletes, and just understanding how to use certain, not necessarily psychological tricks, but using your words correctly to make sure that they're doing what they want. Like, again, there's another gem I got in another course I took. It was actually a sales course, and it said people don't want to pay for what they need, but they'll pay a lot for what they want. And I thought
Mm,
about that. I was like, dang, that's true. People, like, if they want to do it, they'll do it. They'll find a way. So when I first started, I used to be like, you need to do this, this, and this if you want to play blah blah blah. But now I use want all the time. It's like, you want this, this, and this. Like, you want to go heavier on your squat because you want to
mm,
jump higher. You want to blah 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 blah. So using the word want was really important for me. And then just understanding again how to get them on your side. Like, you want kids to be like, when they hit a PR, they're like, oh yeah, Coach Manny, I hit 10 pounds more, I jumped 2 inches higher. Like, you want them to, like, almost want to impress you. And when you can do that, that's a good indicator of they're they're on your side. So just kind
yeah,
of stuff like that, and understanding like body language, or like something I'll do. Like, I'll just kind of tap people and just be like, I mean, you got more than that. And gives them like a little bit of energy of like, okay, I do have more than that. You're right. So just kind of stuff like that. And having that, big, high EQ, and learning like how to read people is huge. And a lot of that honestly comes from making mistakes on it. Cause as an introverted person, I made a lot of mistakes. Like, I remember one time I was talking to a parent, and then I had read somewhere, make sure you're smiling because it makes people like you. And then they're telling me about, like, oh yeah, my son, he twisted his ankle. I'm there like, yeah, like, it's stupid. It looks stupid, right? So just understanding like what you're gonna make your mistakes, but learn how to be someone people want to be around is by far one of the most important skills. That's why we call this the coaching, or sorry, the information, the knowledge part, the 49%, because the
mm,
51% is your actual personality. And there's a lot of people who suck in this industry,
yeah,
but make a lot of money because they know how to bring the energy. And respect to them. Respect to them. That's not quite where I want to be, but
mm,
respect to the people who understand how to be like super charismatic, super personable, and understand how to get people to work out. Because in reality, a lot of people don't like working out.
yeah.
So holding them accountable, getting them to follow through with these goals that they have is a huge skill to have.
Yeah, 100%. And a little story based on that. Um, so I, when I was a child and sort of my early teens, I was a big stutterer. Like if you put me in front of people, I would start stuttering. If I
Hmm.
get nervous, I start stuttering. So coaching for me did that. It completely took that away because like I
Yeah.
had to find this new voice, this new confidence of being like, I'm here. I'm
Yep.
coaching. I have this like now persona, which I'm actually very thankful when you step out in front of a class and you now have to teach this class. If you're you're screwed.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like let me go extra. And
Yeah.
then at UW, this is where I learned to go up even more because
Yeah.
like I had those freshmen in, I had to be like bring the energy so they could bring their energy.
Hmm.
So for me, I was like, I had to shout, and like the
Yeah.
music gets turned up, I have to turn up as well, and then it was just like this combination of peaks.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big thing too. I mean, I remember hearing Mike Boyle say this, like, you have to have your coaching voice. And I think this is what you mean. Like, your coaching voice is being able to be essentially loud without sounding
Mm,
like you're like mad at them, right? Like, you like we are talking about. You bring the energy, you bring your coaching voice develops. Like I said, we have an intern who is more on the quiet side. And this week he's working on, I need to be able to hear you. Like, I can't
mm,
just see you like coaching softly. You got to be able to essentially affect the energy of the room. And it's so one of my mentors, Daniel John, who's the original owner of Maximum Sports Conditioning, and he's still around. But when I first started, you could tell what even him just walking in. like change the energy of the room. And being
Mhm.
able to do that is like huge. And like I said, I talked with Bill Gillespie yesterday. He was another one who could do that. And like one guy I listened to a lot when I was younger is Martin Rooney. Martin Rooney, um, like he is two different people. I listened to him at an NSCA seminar, and he's this loud, boisterous guy, friggin' brings all the energy. And I talked to him in person. I'm like, he's kind of quiet. Like this is a different person. So it's almost like you have to have, different personalities that you know how to use at certain times, and bring it out when you need it. Like I told this to my coaches the other day. Like I took a couple acting classes because I, as an introvert, didn't know how to emote what I wanted. And
Mm.
so they kind of taught me, oh, you're just like too reserved. Like whatever you think you need to be at, be like +3 of that. And I tell that to my coaches too, because during seminars, we've had coaches who are presenting that were just kind of ba 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 like that. And I'm like, just go 2 above what you think you need to be at. Then it ends up being
Mm.
way better because again, in the same way during coaching, you need to be a certain way. Same thing with presenting. You need to be a certain way so you're able to convey the message so people are receptive to it. Like people don't just
Mhm.
acknowledge. They need to connect with it. And that's part of how you get them to connect.
100%. And I think that's also a really good way to sort of find these voices is doing presentations in front of people.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I think that's a key thing within this industry as well because you're essentially presenting every single day.
Hmm.
So having this presentation in front of like coaches that know what you're talking about then adds that little pressure.
Yeah,
And I think that's a really good way to sort of teach these confidence. And I've never thought about doing acting because of that. And
yeah,
like taking an acting class sounds like a really good opportunity to learn these new skills.
yeah, absolutely. And I don't really remember where I heard it, but I remember that I did it and it helped a ton, especially for any of the coaches that are like me, they're naturally introverted, that during class, you know the answer, but your heart would start beating fast and then you get a little sweaty and you don't want to raise your hand. Stuff like that definitely helps with learning how to do that better because it, like I said, that personality part is
Mm,
probably the most important thing because like Mike Boyle said, and I'm sure you heard it somewhere else, but people don't care what you know unless they know that you care.
mm-hmm. 100%. Um, how does that sort of then impact and play into now being the performance sort of facility owner?
Yeah, so a lot of that comes down to one of the things I am going through now is not necessarily programming everyone out because that's my wheelhouse, right? Like I'm like I will program. I have 100% confidence in my program skills, and I will like up again. I'll put it up against anyone. Now that I'm more the owner side of it, it's still the same skill set, but now I'm dealing even more with like parents, making sure
Mm,
they're bought in. Because one of the hard parts about being in the private sector for sports performance is you kind of have two clients, right? You have to have the kid who's willing to do it, you have to have the parent who's willing to pay for it. And so,
mm,
like speaking parent, speaking athlete, speaking coach, like those are all different languages. So, understanding how to speak to people in a certain way is really important. And then essentially, um, over the years, I knew how to instill confidence in the athlete. And then over the last few years, since becoming the manager and then now the owner there, it's have to instill that same confidence in the parent. So they buy into what we're doing because it's not necessarily what again what they think they need. Because all coaches, all parents think their kids need more footwork and more conditioning. And I'm like,
mm,
that's they already doing that at practice. We need to fill in buckets for like speed and power and strength and injury reduction and stuff like that. And getting the message of understanding how we're doing that and why it's better than anything else they're trying to buy has been, kind of where I'm currently growing. And I'll say this, I do a really good job, but it's like if you compare my exercise science abilities and then my marketing and sales it's a big gap. So it's this is where I'm definitely starting to starting to continue to grow as a person and being able to market and get people in because, like I said, program put up against anyone. Just because we have the best program doesn't mean we'll get all the people,
Mm,
because we need to, if they don't even know we exist because we don't market enough, they're not going to come in. They're not going to even
mm,
check us out. So that's probably the biggest thing that I'm kind of learning and getting better at now that I'm more in the owner role versus the kind of lead coach manager type role.
yeah. How important for you is it to like seek out these challenges to sort of make yourself feel uncomfortable, essentially?
Oh, that's huge. That's huge. Because like if I don't, I get bored, and I don't like being bored. Like, um, it's you can become a really good coach in this industry and be very fulfilled, and I definitely am. But the best coaches aren't just coaches. Like, they do stuff
Mm,
outside of our industry, whether it's music, whether it's acting, like we talked about, whether it's could be even like board games, or like some play video games, and just anything where you just kind of continue to challenge yourself, is huge outside of the industry. I know when I was younger, I had to work on like I talked about one of my mentors, DJ Daniel John, and he could like control like the energy of a room, and I had to work on that, and then zoning that in into being able to control like where the sales process is going is important, because like you're finding out with me, I can kind of ramble, and with other people they can also ramble, and it's you got to be able to lead them to this destination that
mm.
you want. um I'm not gonna lie, I kind of forgot what the question was now that I'm rambling, so I wonder if I
Uh,
answered it even.
that's a bit. See, I kind of like when coach like that's why I don't step in a lot is because I know that there's a point that takes time to explain.
Yeah,
So I feel like if I interrupt, that point's going to be lost.
right,
So
exactly.
for me, like it's not to me, it's not rambling whatsoever. To me, it's
Yeah,
just like they're explaining the point because I'm also asking questions off the cuff.
right,
So like obviously, I don't give you a set list of what the questions are step by step because I don't think that's organic.
right.
So I think the questions sort of just need to flow, and I think explaining it the best way you can. I like to hear that because I'm learning as well.
Yeah.
So, but the question was, how important is it to make yourself feel uncomfortable? Essentially, being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Yeah. No, that's huge. I mean, it's just like training, right? Like, if you're doing the same thing all the time, you're not going to get better. So
Mm,
being able to understand all the different facets that comes with owning a gym is really important. Like, you have to understand taxes. You have to understand fixed costs versus variable costs. You have to understand how much profit you need. You need to understand the numbers. How much can you pay your coaches? How much do you have to reserve, like, for those expenses that you have? So being able to do all that's really important. So again, it goes back to, you need to invest in mentors, because
mm,
I'm one of my coaches is the business partner for Eric Cressy, and so they
right.
essentially run a sports performance gym, and that's what we're trying to do. So I don't know if anyone that listens to you knows of this group, but I'm part of a group called Business for Unicorns, and they're a really good group. And I've listened to a couple other ones, and there's a lot of really good mentors out there. But this one in particular kind of vibed with me because, again, like, Eric Cressy is one of the reasons I got in this industry, and so having to being able to speak with um his business partner has been huge for giving me essentially a roadmap for what to do, and the rest of them too. All the rest of the coaches that are on there have been amazing for me, give me kind of insight, because there's certain ways I do things, and then I'll run it by them, and they're like, okay, I see why you're doing that, but try it this way, and it works
Mm,
better. It's like anything, right? Like, people pay us as SNC coaches to lead them down this certain path that they want, that to get to their goal. And it's the exact same thing here. It's their like, I think I need to do a certain way. I need to put it through their filter, because they
mm,
have way more experience than me at it. And it helps me have a clearer vision of what I need to do.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
One of the best sort of sayings that I've heard while going through this industry is coaches need coaches.
Coaches need
And I
coaches, 100%.
and I think that's where you're sort of touching on is like, yes, you can be the best strength and conditioning coach, but the finance of running this business may not be your forte. So you'll need a coach to help that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I say it all the time to my coaches. I'm like, and our athletes even. I'm like, if LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Usain Bolt, Messi, Ronaldo, whatever sport you're into, if they all needed a coach, then we all need a coach because they're the
Mm.
best at what they do and they still need to get coached. So there is no one in this world who does not need a coach. And so it's always good to invest in that.
There was something that I kind of want to play for everyone, and it's something that I found really interesting. To obviously, this is something I implement in my training, but you sort of nailed on each point. So I'm quickly going to play the video. How important have you found that in your training?
Oh my gosh. I can't like before I heard that cue, I would always have wrist pain in
Mm,
my wrist. I'm like, well, how come I can't advance my bench? I have a decent bench, but that cue for keeping your wrist essentially neutral has been huge. And think of it like a punch. Now, again, I will say there's technique, there's form, there's style, and not everyone has the same look when they do it. But that's one of those technique things that allowed me to push more weight because now the weight is centered over my forearm
mhm,
essentially. And that is huge for making sure you can push properly. Because if you're like, you go to extremes to see what happens. If you're way back here or you're way up like this, you're not hitting the correct muscles and you're not going to be able to push efficiently. So that one's been really huge for one, keeping everyone that benches healthy, and then two, making sure they're able to push properly. I will say that there are some athletes and big benchers who do have a little bit of a like a cocked wrist, and that's fine. It works for them. But for us regular folk, we need to start with the fundamentals and do it right, and then from there find some style stuff that works for us. Like I will say, so like I mentioned before, Travis Mash was my powerlifting coach for a little bit, and then he mentioned that I have a slightly cocked wrist when I do it when it gets heavy. And what
mm,
that does is it allows for the bench to go back like at a slight angle. And this goes back to mentors. I thought it was just straight up and down. That's what I thought I was doing. He's like, no, you're actually able to push a decent amount because you do push back at a slight angle. And um, it just kind of ends up being I do that while able to keep my wrist relatively straight but slightly
mm,
cocked. But it's big. It's huge. That's one of the biggest things that I've seen people do, especially when they begin, because they think they have to hold that bar right
mhm,
here, like almost in the pads. And it's like, no, you don't want that. You want it almost in the heel of your hand. Not so much that it's going to hit you in your teeth. If it falls out, you don't want that, but make sure you have it in a strong position because
mhm.
that just technique alone can add a ton of weight to your bench.
Yes, it's the same with overhead squats and any type of uh, where the bar is dictates where you're going to end up. And I've
Yeah.
got this amazing story that I tell sort of my athletes is so when pilots are flying, control will never tell them don't hit something
Mm.
because the minute that you say don't hit something, they're going to hit that something.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So for me, I tell my athletes like if we're here and our head is down, where are you going to end up?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
forward, I'm
Yeah.
going to go forward. I'm going to crash into the floor. I was like, exactly. So when you're over, get those shoulders back, head up, make sure you're looking straight. And they're like,
Yeah.
got you. So
There
like
you go. I love
I
it.
like these stories I think is what makes a coach a good coach. And
Yeah.
like every coach that I've spoke to on this podcast so far has these little gems. What's your biggest gem
Oh
that
my
you tell your
gosh.
athletes?
I don't know if I have the biggest. There's a lot. There's just a lot. I mean, I've said a lot of them already. Um, like best ability is durability or availability, however which way you want to go with that. Make sure you coach people like in a way that makes them want to do it. That's a huge
Mm,
one. Um, God, there's a lot. I mean, one that I really like is like there's a lot of different rep schemes, and this is particular to athletes, and this is kind of that buy-in part. Is there's a lot of different rep schemes: 3x10, 5x5, 10x2, blah 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 blah. The hardest rep scheme you'll ever do is 3x52. Like, what's that? It's like you gotta come in 3 times a week, 52
Mm,
weeks a year. If you are able to be consistent, you will do whatever you want in this sport. But that's probably your biggest thing, because we can spike you for a little bit, but you got to be consistent. It's just like your sport. You got to be consistent, and you got to do it the right way. I mean, if you do too much, you'll get hurt. If you do too little, you won't get better. So
mm,
finding kind of that optimum zone is huge as far as advancing yourself. I literally just had a conversation about um like how many swings to take for baseball athletes, because some people will just take like 3 times as many as they should, because a lot of people have this idea, and it's kind of, I heard this from Tony Holler, like there's a lot of people who would rather work too much and lose than not work enough and win. It's like
mm,
so many people have essentially injured themselves out of their sport because they think they need to do more. And I'm like, no, you need to, like, let's take baseball. If you're swinging, if you're really good, get better in 20 swings. Don't need to take
mhm.
200. And just kind of going from there. Again, I'm rambling again. But
Yeah,
there's just so many different gems that you need. But
my
for the coaches,
my
I will say work on that personality part. That's probably
yeah,
the biggest one I had to learn, at least.
my on that point, my first ever S&C coach, I was 13, and his saying is, "There's no such thing as perfect. Practice makes perfect.
Hmm.
Practice makes perfect." That's the usual
Yeah.
saying, but his would be perfect practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's taking that, you can practice to practice, or you can specialize that practice to perfect your performance.
Yeah, exactly. And that's huge. I mean, I think it was the talent code that talked about, like, you could practice piano for 4 hours, but I think they said if you put your mind into your fingers, you'll get more
Mm,
done in 1 hour than 4 hours. Because you're not just doing like, BS stuff. You're doing stuff that'll make you better.
100%. So, what's one piece of advice that you would give new coaches or up and coming coaches?
Um, so I'll say for our interns, I usually have them read 3 books. So it's usually
Mm,
conscious coaching, like you
yep.
you have mentioned before. I really like Coaching Rules. Simple read. That's like the first one they do. It's by a guy who worked under Mike Boyle. It's one of those books where it's like, I wish I had it 10 years ago.
Mm,
That has just a lot of like 1 page stuff that's like just gems that you need to have as far as how to get better, as well as how to keep like clients and stuff like that. And then the third one is practical programming. I mean, as much as I don't do that style of programming, it has a lot of science in there, has a lot of like how do you determine if someone is a beginner versus intermediate versus advanced? And just having your mindset of how to look at it. Those are 3 books I always say, like, if you understand those 3 books, you'll be ahead of 95% of the industry.
mm,
And then from there, just continue to learn, continue to reach out, continue to work on stuff you need to. Like, as much as I kind of say the science stuff is 49%, you better have all 49% of that
mm,
filled up. You can't just be like, oh, I'll have a good personality and only know 20% of what I need to know. Like me as an owner, I won't even talk to you about like a job with us if you're just like not there. Now, if you're a beginner and you're learning, I'll let you intern. I'll let you, but you got to
mm,
show you're willing to learn. And like one of the big things that I was reflecting on recently is I learned how to be funnier as a person from a 5-year-old when I was like 25. I was like, dang,
um,
this kid's hella funny. Oh, he's doing that thing. So always be willing to learn. Like, I'll say this, you had Nate on your podcast.
mm,
I've learned a ton from Nate. He's one of those guys I can talk to, and I know I'm having an intelligent conversation about exercise science. And like don't be afraid to get challenged on your stuff. Like, there's people out
mm,
there who will disagree with you, who are really good. And usually what happens is you'll agree on 90% and you just have to figure out why you disagree on the 10%. But continue to learn. Don't get so invested in a certain methodology that you think that's the end all be all,
Mm,
and just understand how to. I like the way Zach Goodman put it. The reason we like conjugate is because it just gives us more tools on our toolbox. And it's your job as a coach to understand which tool to use.
yeah. The episode with Nate isn't out at this point, but we spent 2 hours and 49 minutes speaking.
Nice. Good,
And it
good,
was
good.
just, first of all, it was us like reconnecting again. We were just like
Yeah.
going through the UW experience,
Yeah.
what we'd learned, but then we just got to geek out. And like
Yeah.
me and Nate have this thing where I oversimplify everything to athletes,
Yeah.
whereas Nate's super scientific. And I
Yeah.
think me and him gel really well because we can sort of bounce ideas. Because obviously, I still know the science side of it,
Yeah.
but with him, I learned that extra like 2-3% I didn't. And that to
Yeah.
me is crucial as well. And I think during these conversations, like you said, even if you disagree on the 5%, figure out why.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And that's where all the good conversations are, because if we know the 90+% of what we need to do and we can just agree on that, that's a 5-minute conversation.
Mm,
But where we disagree is where these like hour plus long conversations come from. And then it's interesting now that we have podcasts and stuff, because now whenever you do one of those, it's there forever. And then you
mm-hmm.
can look back a year from now and be like, oh, I said this thing and I don't agree with it anymore. And
Yes.
that's what you'll see. All the great coaches I've talked to have been like, I used to do this thing and I don't do it anymore. And there are even some that are like, I used to do this thing, I don't do it anymore, but now it's coming back and I do it
Mm,
now. And it's one of the assignments we have our athletes do is you have to create a program, 2-day week. We'll give constraints, and then you have to explain why. And then
mm-hmm.
one of the things that people do is like they'll write 2 sets of 10, and I'll be like, how come 10? How come not 9, not 11? And they'll always be like, I just feel like it's a good number. And I'm like, okay, do your assignment again. Like you can't just be like, I feel like it's good. Like you better be 10 plus years in the game if you're relying on just how something feels. Other than that, you gotta be like, I got it from this coach, or I got it from this podcast, or I got it from this training
Mm,
modality. And you got to be able to justify everything. Like,
100%.
oh my God, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, I just feel like it's good. I feel like blah blah blah. And I'm like, I'm glad you feel that. Now you gotta be able to prove it with
It's
me.
like
Like
that
you got,
spidey senses tingling.
yeah, exactly, exactly. I'm like, you don't have a spidey sense yet. You still need to develop that, and don't have the ego to be like, oh, I know everything. You just got to
Mm,
be like, I'm still learning, and no one should ever stop learning.
no.
Everyone that's in this industry a long time is constantly talking to me about what they're learning,
Mm,
asking me about stuff. I'm constantly asking other coaches about stuff, and it's you gotta have good people around you to bounce ideas off of.
100%. One of my hardest like learning curve years was this past academic year, where I did my dissertation on female athletes' perception on SSC coaches and how like effective they are essentially. And to me, I learned one of the biggest things was that one, SSC coaches that are males don't always talk about periods.
Yeah,
So for
yeah,
me, I then had to research and do all my research on periods. So
yeah,
then these athletes were coming in talking about periods, and I was like, okay, now I can sort of talk to you about it because I know a little bit more.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think
Absolutely.
really challenging and pushing those boundaries of what you're comfortable with as well is
Yeah,
key to that
huge.
development.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll find the book for you, but there's a that's something as a male I had to learn too, like how to coach females up. It's
Mm,
not to say that there's necessarily differences, but there are like nuances to it, right?
nuances.
And there's a particular book that I read that talked about kind of the female experience, at least here in America, from I don't know if you can hear, but my dogs are barking out there. But yeah, no, females experiences in America and everything they have to deal with is psychological, from a
Mm,
psychological profile and all that. And it's really eye-opening to me. So kind of going back to like, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading about all this stuff that I wasn't aware of. Then I had to be like, oh, I'm in my 30s and I wasn't proactive enough to understand this stuff. So being able to keep my ego in check and be like, okay, I can either be like, no, you got to follow what I say, or I can be like, oh, okay, I'm going to learn how females may be different and then take what I can apply. And it's helped me tremendously even
Mm-hmm.
this many years in. So it goes back to just keep being educated about what you're trying to do. Like it's easy to be like a dictator, and it's easy to be like, do it this way because I know this. And this people don't want to be with people like that.
Yeah.
Like it maybe in generations before they appreciated that, but and going back to conscious coaching, there's just different types of personalities.
Mm-hmm.
You got to have the education to know who you're dealing with, and that way you can give them the best of what you have.
100%. And that is one of the biggest ways that I've learned to coach is through that book. Because, like, obviously, we both speak English, like UK and America, but we're sort of raised differently. Like,
Yeah,
here, you're kind of reserved a little bit. You're just like, you don't want to give out too much. Whereas in
yeah,
America, it's loud, it's boisterous, it's over the top for me.
yeah,
So it was like navigating some of the kids that were coming in and being like, okay, you're this type of person. Okay, then I'm going to just hang back, like do little gestures to sort of build that trust.
yeah,
Or like there was guys that just like came up to me straight away and spoke and just let everything rip. So for
yep,
me, I was like, okay, then you're this type of guy and I can do this with. And
yeah,
it's sort of just marrying the two and how to effectively coach everyone.
yeah, absolutely. And even to that extent, like you a person is a certain way just at that certain time, like it's in conscious
Mm,
coaching. Like on a different day they might need a different way to be coached. You can't
yep.
just it's as much like I'm very much a math and science guy, and as much as I would love like this person is always going to be like this, that's just not always the case. So you got to be it's a dynamic system. You got to be
Hmm.
able to flow with where you want to where they need them to be, and you have to essentially just be a chameleon and be
Yep.
like you have to be able to go into what you need to be. You can't just be this person and then everyone has to conform to you. You have to be
100%.
able to conform to your environment.
100%. I think that book is the staple to what coach I am now, is because like you need to learn exactly. So for me, anytime an athlete comes into the gym, there's two questions I always ask. How are you? How are you doing today?
Hmm.
How did you sleep? Well, three, sorry, three questions. How did you sleep? I slept good. Amazing, let's push it. Oh, I slept
Yeah.
terribly. Okay, we'll knock it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Three, have you ate today? How much have you ate
Hmm.
today?
Yeah.
Hydration. How much did you drink today? And then that sort of just gives you a baseline for how that session can go. And then you
Yep.
can sort of, if they're tired, if they've not slept well, you can adapt it. Okay, he's tired. He's not going to be 100%. He's not going to be over the top. He's not going to be buzzing. So let me change my way of coaching so that he can still get that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And one of the things that I learned, I actually I actually learned this trick from a buddy of mine. So there's a it's not necessarily a board game, but it's a game that you buy. It's called The Resistance. It's very similar to Mafia where you just have to find like who the spies are. One of the
Mm,
things he did to me was when we won the first round, we gave each other a high five. And then he was like, that high five was a little weird. I feel like you might be. I was a spy. And he caught me just off that. And I was like, what do you mean your high five is weird? And so I remember learning that. And now, ever since COVID, we used to give high fives a lot. Now we give more
mm,
like fist bumps. Um, but a fist bump can let you know how someone's feeling. And if someone's usually like they're usually pretty tough with it, and you're like, oh, they're ready to go. And sometimes it's just kind of soft. You might be like, huh, you okay today? And then like it's
mm,
just these little things that like you'll pick up on for people. Like a lot of people use the warm up for that, but me personally, I found just fist bumps that tells a ton about how
mm.
someone's feeling, both physically and mentally.
I've never thought about that, but that is true. Like sometimes you just get one of those, you're like, okay,
Yeah, exactly. If it's soft, you're like, ooh, they might not be there today. Let's delve a little deeper, see what's going on.
100%. Um, thank you so much for coming on. Obviously, I know that you're a little bit pushed for time today.
Yeah,
Um,
no problem.
do you want to plug your Instagrams, your websites, and all that?
Yeah,
Good stuff.
absolutely. So again, anyone can reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk with people. Instagrams are at Coach SACHIN McDONNELL. The gym is at MaxSC_gym. We're revamping our MaxSC website, so don't visit that yet, but we will be up in a couple of weeks. But MaxSC.net. I do online stuff with Paladin HHP, that's Health and Human Performance. And then again, man, thank you for having me on your podcast. I appreciate it. Let me know. I'm more than happy to come on again.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on. I obviously, every coach that comes on, I value their time a lot, and obviously I know how busy you are, so pleasure is all mine, and thank you for coming on. And I'd
Yep.
love to have you again as well.
All right. Yep. Anytime.
Peace.
See you later.